Before I introduce you to the panel, let me talk about the regulatory sandbox topic itself. This is something I have to say. If you see all the innovation, the investments in new technology, in FinTechs and other areas, and for the financial service industry, we're talking about every year $20 billion of investments going into new technologies. And I think this number will even be higher going forward because the startups will get access to even a bigger pool of capital going forward. And we saw in 2016 with the FCA, the regulator in London, approaching that to setting up the first regulatory sandbox program. Besides having a FinTech team, a CTO, that was one of the key measures. And then we saw other regulators also chiming in. And I think looking at that, I think the key focus or benefits, the purpose of that is definitely to remove uncertainty. And uncertainty is for all the players in the community and ecosystem important to remove that because it attracts capital, it attracts resources, etc., to guide a bank and the FinTech to overcome questions, how to utilize, what are the benefits, what are the limitations in doing this, and then do this in a joint way. Joint way, that meaning the learning curve on both sides are coming up to speed at the same time, instead of doing this in a sequential way, which has an impact on speed and agility. And then with that uncertainty move away, that attracts usually investors. That's because that's something that they hate if there's some uncertainty in the marketplace. And then it's an ongoing learning, adapting. And what we hear also from both panelists is this whole regulatory sandbox is not a static approach. It's a learning and improvement, understanding about the critical success factors. And then based on that, we'll see more and more recommendation, how to utilize certain technology for new products, business models, etc. So I think in that whole new business to embrace disruptive technology, I think it's a must-have, those regulatory sandboxes. And then if you look at then the map of regulatory sandboxes, I think the coverage is global. It's a global topic. From Asia to Europe to North America, there's a lot of activities going on. Plus, there's a lot of interaction between the regulators to address. And it's really my pleasure that we have very good global coverage with our panel today. We have with Bernard Wee from the MAS, the Singapore regulator. And we have Pat Chaukos coming from the OSC, the local Ontario regulator running the Launchpad. So I think it's great to have the perspective from both of them, what's going on in the region, because it's still a local, regional topic, and how this will maybe come together.
I was asked to talk about innovation sandboxes. You can't get away from a sandbox without talking about FinTech. Because the only reason why you have a sandbox is because you have FinTech companies. And to us, a smart financial center is no different from a regular financial center. What does that mean? It means that you have to go back to being a purposeful financial center. What is a purposeful financial center? You have to help people achieve their dreams, what they're trying to save for college, save for retirement, borrow to buy that tractor, buy the vehicle to make deliveries. That's what a financial center does. Sandboxes. Now, to us, a sandbox fits into a regulator, a policymaker's toolkit. This is the life cycle of a startup. I think you can break it up into 4 main phases. The first and the top 2 encourage as many ideas to be created as possible. And you do that through hackathons, through accelerators, to bring up as much of the ideation at the start of the process, at the start of the life cycle. In the second phase, you want to help FinTech companies to go up the learning curve as quickly as possible. So you encourage them to experiment with FIs, experiment with the public sector, and co-create with industry, because you want to align fintech companies, you want to align their intention, align their technology with what society wants, with what FIs are trying to do, with what government is trying to do, with what society is trying to achieve for itself. That's the purpose of the second phase. The third, graduated regulations, to right-size regulations for the risks that companies pose, for the risks that fintechs pose, for the types of financial activities that fintechs take, because fintech companies aren't necessarily about being universal, being straight through, being all one stop, but rather being very focused, very targeted at what services they want to provide. So right-sizing regulations is an important third part. And finally, recognition. Recognizing successful businesses, recognizing successful fintech companies, recognizing successful business models, so that you create a virtuous cycle. You set a good example for more people to create more new ideas, more new business models. And that's the life cycle of fintech. It's the same life cycle that we have for any type of technology. So where does the regulatory sandbox fit? It fits in between getting companies to develop business models, to develop ideas, and between success, because you need to create a space for companies to experiment, to find out if they're going to succeed, to find out if they're not going to succeed. That's where we see the sandbox. The most important question about why we have sandbox is the two questions that fintech companies come to MAS. The first is, what financial activity am I doing? Am I a securities dealer? Am I a financial advisor? Am I a money broker? Am I a money changer? Is there a difference? What regulations apply to me? Because very often, they come and tell us, I can't navigate your website. Your website is organized according to the activities you've already decided. Your rules are written by lawyers for lawyers to read, and lawyers are expensive, and I'm just a fintech company. Tell me how I fit into your regulatory framework. And then we spend a lot of time. We sit down with them, understand their business model, to explain to them these are the requirements. Your business model looks like this. I think these requirements apply to you. Then you get to part two of the problem. I can't meet your requirements, because the two things that fintech companies do not have are money and time. And this affects their ability to pay down capital requirements or liquidity requirements, fees, or they don't have time. What does don't have time mean? They may not have a board that has track record. They may not have a CEO that has spent enough time in the industry. It's important to explain to fintech companies why we require certain things, why we require working capital to cover 6 months of operating expenses. But usually these are the two or three, well, actually it's two big areas that fintech companies come to us for. I don't understand the rules, you tell me the rules and I can't meet them. And that leads us to the nature of the sandbox. I think let me just focus on a couple of areas. One is the when. To us, a sandbox needs to be open all year round to everyone. We know that some regulators have a sandbox qualification period. It's like a beauty parade. You can apply to be part of the sandbox. I would choose maybe 10, 20 people to enter the sandbox for a period of 6 months. To us, that's great, but you're not competing against others. To us, every business competes against itself. And you never know when you're going to have a good idea, whether it's in March, May, or September, that you're going to have a good business proposal. So for us, it was very important from the start, to be always open for application. And the last part I wanted to focus on is experiments within boundaries. I think we have to make clear, whether it's to the fintech company, but most importantly, to consumers, where the boundaries are. So for us, the sandbox people who are in our sandbox are listed on our website. We make clear to consumers that you are dealing with an entity that is lightly regulated, has been given a number of exemptions. You may not even be eligible for dispute resolution that we have set up for regular financial services. It is as much as it's important to empower the FinTech companies, it is also important to empower consumers to make their own decisions about the risks that they want to take. My last slide is on the sandbox process. So there are 3 phases to the sandbox process. The first is the application stage. I say there are 3, but actually there are 3 plus 1. Before you get to the application stage, there's a lot of consultation with the FinTech company. So it's a pre-application stage. Tell us about what you want to do before you submit the form, before you submit your application, because we don't want you to spend a lot of time writing up an application that is incorrect, that is incomplete, that is not going to help you. So have a conversation with us in the pre-application phase. But we do commit that once you submit a formal application, we will aim to give an indication of whether it's suitable for the sandbox within 21 working days. And that's the application process. Then after we give an indication that it is suitable, we work with the company in the evaluation stage, back and forth, to understand exactly what dispensations it needs, what exemptions it requires, and what we can give and what we can't. And at this point, it's also important for us to work with the company to draw red lines, because there are things that every financial service needs to offer its customers. Number 1, customer confidentiality. They need to treat their customers seriously. They need to treat their customers with privacy. Number 2, fit and proper. Being FinTech doesn't make anyone exempt from fit and proper requirements. The third, AML. Also very important, because once you get your foot wrong on ML and TF issues, it's very hard to get back on again, and that's important to all of us. So that's the evaluation stage. Then we get into experimentation, and then we set clear timelines, how long the experiment is meant to last, and when you need to let us know if you need to extend the experiment. Sandbox is not a quick sandbox. You're not meant to be stuck in there forever. So the idea is really to get out of the sandbox into the mainstream.
I'm Pat Chaukos. I lead the OSC Launchpad initiative at the Ontario Securities Commission. We're set up a little differently than MAS. We are the Securities and Investment Industry regulator. So in Canada, that is kind of under provincial authority, so we work with our other securities regulators across the country. We started this initiative last year around this time. It was a pilot, and I'm actually pleased to announce that Launchpad is going to be permanent. So that really is a reflection of our commitment to innovation over the long term. So really excited about that. And we'll talk a little bit of kind of what we've seen in the past year and why we think this is important. Our initiative is similar to MAS, FCA, and ASIC. They tend to use the terminology, or at least ASIC and the FCA, talk about Innovation Hub and Sandbox. We've actually tried to put both into this initiative because, number 1, Innovation Hub is really the direct support to the FinTech community and engagement with the FinTech community. But what we're finding is people do need relief. They come in, you can talk to them about what the regulatory requirements are, but if there's a barrier, they're saying, I can't do that. So we needed the ability to provide some type of relief. We're set up, I'll call it hub and spoke. I know that's not kind of a FinTech term, but we've got a small core team, and then we've got dedicated staff within each of the branches. Because if you're coming into us and you're talking about a digital platform, we've got to make sure we've got our market reg staff and people involved. Because this is change. This is change for the regulator as well, and we need to be able to obviously have everybody involved as part of that. These are some of the events that we've had over the past year, anywhere from OSC Dialogue, which is our big annual event focused on FinTech last year and embracing change this year. I'm going to talk a little bit about we had our own hackathon very early on, a lot of learnings coming out of that. We've got a great video and white paper if you're interested. Information days, really an opportunity to come in and talk to us, ask any kind of questions even before you're even thinking about a business and how we can help. Obviously meetups, industry conferences like the one today. In terms of requests for support, we're finding businesses at various stages, some that are ready to be licensed or registered, and some very early on and just thinking about an idea. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the CSA Regulatory Sandbox in a bit. In Canada, as I said, we have although Ontario is home to 80% of the capital markets, we work with our provincial regulators because investors are across Canada. We're obviously a large company in terms of geographic region. So we want to make sure that any business that's coming into us or coming into BC or any of the provinces is able to operate across Canada. And then finally, this is an interesting topic. It's an interesting topic for everyone because these businesses, especially some of the larger players, they're looking to operate globally. So you heard earlier this morning people talking about data standards, even standards in terms of regulation and how do you apply, because especially the global firms need to be able to operate worldwide. So in terms of businesses that we've seen, obviously in terms of trends, we had already started to see peer-to-peer lending. Obviously that's important in terms of alternative lending sources. Venture capital investing platforms, and I think that's important because obviously startups, new businesses are really looking to raise capital, and how do you do that if you're not able to get in the door of a large venture cap firm? And I'll give an example of that. AngelList, which is obviously a global platform, is now here in Canada, and we were part of that. Our FinTech Advisory Committee is a very important part for us because we recognize we don't know what we don't know. And so what we did is we have a FinTech Advisory Committee made up of business people that are in this space, whether they're the venture cap firms that are looking at these businesses or the ones that are building the blockchain technologies or ones that are thinking about kind of online advising and some of the other new developments, whether it's artificial intelligence or otherwise. So our RegHack TO, we were the first Canadian regulator to actually have a hackathon, weekend-long hackathon supported by our executive. And we actually had our Minister of Finance also attend. It was first of its kind, over 130 attendees, and then obviously 40 OSC volunteers. And as I said, for me personally, that was important because this is change for us even as an organization. We had problem statements in RegTech, know your client and identity verification. For me, that's a huge area. We've actually in our white paper put out a challenge to people in terms of if you're thinking about this kind of business, come in and talk to us because you don't want to have to be every single time you go for a mortgage or a loan or a bank account or your securities dealer account filling out similar information. How can we make that a better process for everyone? And then finally, transparency in areas that we don't typically have transparency. Think about OTC markets, exempt markets. If we can improve transparency in some of those areas, I think that would be a great thing for all of us, Canada and globally.